I recently went over to my parents' house and picked up one of my last remaining machine tools. Now, as far as getting this off the truck, I thankfully have gravity on my side. Whew. This main casting weighs probably 150 pounds or so if I had to guess. But that's one solid casting, and if you look at the interior conditioning, there's no flashing. At this point, some of you might be able to tell what this is. It's a tool grinder. Not just any tool grinder. A really nice Swiss tool grinder. With diamond wheels, micrometer feed adjustment, a compound to set just about any angle you can think of, and it's really quite a special machine. Let's get the rest of it out, unpacked, and together. Every single part of this grinder is cast and heavy. The coolant drawer, for example, has got to be a solid 20-30 pounds on its own. I mean, I guess that is one way to make things not vibrate. Let's make them really heavy. Now, it's been about 7 years since this was last in my possession, and it started to develop a bit of surface corrosion. Could also use a good wipe down. All cast steel. The motor currently isn't installed on the back. I removed it for transport. The only defect really is the light holder is broken. I bought it that way. I should probably make a new piece. Here are the remaining parts for it. 3-phase motor and back cover. And I've got a couple tool holders for it as well. 2 collets and 1 square shank tool holder. I also have a coolant pump for it, which I've never ran, but I believe does run. It's also 3-phase, so I need a second VFD for that. Let's go ahead and start cleaning this up a bit. I'm just going to start by using some generic corrosion inhibitor. In this case, PB Blaster. WD-40 would also work fine. And some fine steel wool. All this corrosion just comes right off, really. Time always tries to take away our machines. Just using a rag to wipe the corrosion from the surface. And that really does clean up quite nicely. I will stone this surface before I install a tool. Not looking to get this perfect at the moment. Just clean it up and get it back to functional. That's much better. Now I do have a couple of tool holders for this. Probably the one I would use most is the square shank tool holder. You can see you get another graduation in this style. You can lock it to position like that. It's very rigid, so that allows you to set your side relief as well as your nose relief angle. In addition to the square shank tool holder, I do have two indexable collets. Here's one, all dusty from not being used. Additionally, you can remove this collet and insert larger round tools. Very convenient. This third tool is yet another collet holder, so it has a slightly different indexing system. I haven't actually used this yet. Unfortunately, it was beat up a little bit by the previous owner. I will need to go and do a bit of research on exactly what tool holder systems these are and find the correct collets. These all clearly are in much need of a rebuild before we put them back into service. Still, I have them, and I had bought this unit, I think at least 14 years ago. I was still 17, and I paid $300 for the entire thing. It was up in Connecticut, and it's very complete. Has an arbor for the side cutting wheel. It has a coarse and fine diamond wheel mounted on it now. I have cup wheels for it. Really just a very, very nice piece, and considering the price, really impossible to beat. Now, when I first purchased this unit, I was a lot younger, and there were some things at the time that I still remember to this day as not being really all that great. For starters, I only had the spindle motor connected, and I did not have the coolant pump running, so I had to do all of my grinding operations dry. I never had much issue grinding tools dry, but I would like to get the coolant system going, which means I'm going to either need to replace the coolant pump with a single phase unit, or I need another VFD for the coolant pump. Considering I have the original coolant pump for this model, I think I'm going to do my best to get that working. The other thing that I didn't really like about this is that I had a VFD controlling the spindle, but it did not use the factory controls. These factory buttons are, frankly, just some of the coolest I've ever used. They latch into place and just have a good feeling to them. Now, this is a very commonly replicated tool grinder. A lot of people know them as Agathon 150, 175 series. And for the most part, I think everything is interchangeable. Now, considering I was a broke teenager when I got this machine, I had found just whatever VFD was cheapest on eBay. Turns out I got a pretty good VFD. I didn't really know what I was doing as far as setting it up. I went through the hassle of connecting a start-stop push button. Why I didn't just go the extra distance and connect it to the factory push button, I'm not really sure. Maybe I got confused when I looked at the 3-wire diagram. Who knows? I was a teenager, and like most teenagers, I was probably distracted by something. Now, I have two goals for putting this machine back together. First one is I want it to look original. I don't want to have any VFDs mounted on the outside or any monitors or anything like that. Just want the factory 2-button start stop controls. What I think I'm going to do is mount the VFD on the inside of the cabinet, just to the left of where the drive motor normally sits, and use that port in the top left for power entry. I'll have a power cord that I can plug into one of my 220 volt outlets, and that will feed the VFD, which will be connected to these control panels and to the original drive motor and look really nice and original. I'll then set up the VFD to start and stop the motor, and it'll more or less just be a glorified soft starter. At a later date, I might choose to add a potentiometer for variable speed control, but honestly, when I use it, I would always run it at the factory RPM, and it cut all of my tools beautifully. Now before I dig into these switches, I'm just going to wipe them down a little bit. Considering its age and that it was originally used in a factory environment, this machine's in very nice condition. Sometimes I wonder if people took better care of their tools simply because they can see the craftsmanship in them. Gives you an appreciation for what you have. I think out of all of my machine tools, this one speaks to me the most. The fact that literally every part is cast. Complete overkill. Not only is it cast, it wasn't cast to make it cheaper, it was cast out of good steel so well that even the inside has practically no flashing. Just shows a pride of craftsmanship at every single step. Next, let's take a look inside these switches and see what the circuit looks like. Let's open this switch up. I think I would consider this to be the second most important tool in my shop. I think manual lathe is the most important. Okay. Looks like we've got some cable attached. And we might be able to just use this, but it looks a little short. Let's take this over to the workbench, pop the cover off, get our multimeter out, and start testing the contacts. So I pulled this switch apart, and then I realized that younger me was not so dumb after all. This is a circuit breaker. You can see it's actually a really interesting unit in that you could adjust the amperage at which it breaks. Now, what that means for me, unfortunately, is that I can't easily use it as an on-off switch for VFD control. I spent a little while looking at this, and I considered machining some type of adapter to still use this original faceplate, but for the moment, I don't really have the time to get into that. So I think what I'm going to do at this point is set these aside and simply replace it with a different switch. I'll probably try and locate a nice push button latching switch and 3D print an adapter to mount to the machine. I will save these. They're really a beautiful part, but not going to work for my needs at the moment. While I'm waiting for my adapters to be 3D printed, I'm going to go ahead and remove the other start-stop switch. I'm going to continue wiping clean the exterior of the tool grinder, and following that we'll disassemble some of the fixturing. We'll get all of that cleaned up, probably throw some of it into the ultrasonic cleaner, lube it all up, get it back together. And once we have our covers 3D printed and our switches arrive, we can remount those, as well as getting our VFDs mounted inside of the control enclosure. Some of this grease is pretty well stuck on. We'll probably take a couple of wipes to get it all off. Here's a look at the back side of the unit, which also could use some good cleaning. It's really just a light coat of grinding dust that gets on everything. Never actually realized that this whole thing is blue. It's just so coated. and grinding dust that you can't even tell. I'm going to go ahead and remove the grinding wheel covers. Just so I can clean them a little better. It's on here quite tight. I'm going to take off the grinding wheel so I don't damage it trying to pull this guard off. This is a left-hand nut, so it loosens to the right. Thankfully not too tight. That's just a 400 grit diamond wheel. That is coming out, not from that bushing. I think maybe that loosens the rod. I think what I'm going to do is pop this top cover off, see if I can't look inside and determine what's going on inside of there. You can see there's a bushing, essentially where that rod goes through. Now, I can't make out anything else that would hold that rod in place except for those screws in the back. So I think we just have to tug on this a little bit harder and it should come out. It does appear to be coming out. Albeit slowly. It's just almost there. Gross. Next, can do the same on the other side. Let's get this wheel off. There we go. It's an 800 grit fine wheel. All of this will get thrown in the ultrasonic. Oh, I fear that's more stuck than the last. I think once more, slow and steady. It's going to be the name of the game with this one. It is coming. I'm going to take both of these and throw them in the ultrasonic cleaner just as is. I'm going to go ahead and get this tool out of the way. And I'm just thinking, since all of this is pretty grody, I'm just going to go ahead and disassemble it fully because it's really not too complicated. Got a 6mm set screw here. There's a 5mm set screw here. Just gonna lock that back in place. I believe once I loosen this side, we should be able to pull that whole collar off. So what I've done here is I've loosened this set screw and I've rotated this all the way in, exposing the screw head. The screw seems to be a bit stuck, so I'm going to use an impact driver. Did have to grind the tip just a bit to get it to seat nicely. There we go. Just like that. Now this should be free to go out the other side. Just like that. There's 2 sets of bearings in here actually. Seem to be in okay shape. It's a spring to keep the dial preloaded, to keep this, or to keep the backlash out of the mechanism. Pretty neat. Get that pulled off. That can all be cleaned out properly. And got the rod out. I think we'll just quickly clean those bushings up, wipe the rod down, get all of this soaked down with some degreaser, and then reassemble. I'm just gonna soak all of this down with some engine degreaser. Being careful to not get any on the shafts. Don't usually go to these lengths, but this stuff is pretty baked on. It's been a long time since anybody cleaned this. I think it's time we pulled out our old friend, the drill brush. Next, I'll just wipe all of this off. It's definitely far from perfect, but it's a lot better. Definitely some more scrubbing to be done. Cleaning really filthy old machines tends to be a very iterative process. You have to slowly go through all of the layers, just breaking through the gunk. These springs, I think, were added at some point to try and keep the nozzles in place. Never really found they did much for me, so I'll just chuck those. Make sure to keep any machine surfaces dry. Don't think I actually have a nut for that. I'll have to find one at some point. Well, messed up a little bit. I just went over to the ultrasonic to check on the condition of the guards, and it appears that just the temperature alone was enough to strip all of the paint off of these guards. So
At this point, it's probably pretty obvious that scope creep has completely taken a hold of me. If you want to see just how deep the rabbit hole this restoration takes us, you're going to have to tune in next time to Roken Motor Company.